All right. Next we have Jesse Fowler. And Jesse, if you want to, I know you're going to be sharing, so I don't know if you want to start getting that ready while I'm introducing you. So Jesse Fowler holds an MPS in Global Development from Cornell University, an MPA in Public Management from the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University Bloomington, and a BA in English from Biola University. Fowler specializes in public administration, economics, and education. He is also an avocational poet published in both English and Spanish. Fowler has been invited to speak at top global institutions with subject matter ranging from foreign affairs at Cornell University and theoretical physics at University of Cambridge, to generative artificial intelligence at the University College of London, and poetry at the University of Oxford. Thank you, Jesse. Great to have you.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me all right and see the presentation?
We can.
Wonderful. Okay. So, hello and welcome to my presentation. Thank you for this invitation to speak here, and thank you, Osvaldo and Nathaniel. Those were two wonderful presentations as well. My name is Jesse. This presentation discusses what three Cuban surrealists, were they still alive today, might reasonably say of not only the U.S. embargo against Cuba, but especially its negative impact on Cuban education and economy today. The embargo is an economic sanctions regime that dates to the Eisenhower administration's arms embargo of 1958 during the Cuban Revolution of 1953 to 1959 between U.S.-backed then dictator Fulgencio Batista and then rebel leader Fidel Castro. The embargo prohibits all U.S. trade goods, save certain foodstuffs and medicines directly exported to the Cuban citizenry by the U.S. government, because by starving the fellow sovereign nation of key resources needed for economic development, the U.S. desires to bend Havana to Washington's will. This ban on U.S. trade goods is especially significant during the new media age of today, as U.S. technologies like Zoom during the COVID-19 pandemic and ChatGPT more recently last and this year lead and largely determine what are possible for economic growth and opportunity within the global marketplace with free trade and especially technology transfer. While denied U.S. trade goods, Cuba is also denied equitable economic growth and opportunity in the global economy. In turn, the U.S. has perhaps unintendedly encouraged a highly nationalized mixed command economy within a Cuba that is forced to largely rely upon its own endogenous production and consumption. A highly nationalized mixed command economy is a behaviorally Marxist economy in which the state predominantly controls resources limited in a geopolitical space, but the economy still includes the private sector to a much lesser extent determined by the federal government. Along with such Marxist behavior, a Cuban national mood has emerged for resistance to or liberation from U.S. behavior and embargoed reason. This ongoing social reality of the Cuban world today is a reality appropriately captured by Cuban surrealists in the 20th century, including the three that we'll discuss now. The late Cuban surrealists considered are painter Wifredo, painter Eduardo Abela, and sculptor Agustín Cárdenas, all of whom lived when the embargo began. Their works are used for interpretation within this presentation to reason what the Cuban surrealists might make of the embargo today, were they still alive. While it remains unknowable what exactly the late Cuban surrealists would say of the embargo today, were they still alive, this presentation nevertheless reasons that they would consider it to be neo-colonial behavior from which Cuba ought to have liberation, such that Cuba might have more equitable economic growth and opportunity possible within the global marketplace. Let's take a look first at Lamb's painting, La Jungla, or The Jungle. La Jungla depicts 5 Cuban characters wearing masks. With the masks, there is a hiding that takes place. Still, the characters exist within a forest of Cuban sugar cane, which is an important economic note because Cuba is one of the largest exporters of sugarcane in the global economy. Regarding the Cuban characters wearing masks, Interpreted is that the characters do not hide their faces or identities from the world, in as much as they instead hide the world from their faces, in an attempt to not identify with the world around them, that is, in an attempt to retain their collective sense of being authentic to who they are as a people struggling with neocolonial power. This notion of hiding the world from oneself and not merely oneself from the world relates to Martinican psychiatrist Frantz Fanon's saying that, quote, the more the non-white Caribbean assimilates, the whiter he gets, i.e., the closer he comes to becoming a so-called true human being, unquote. In the Cuban context, a human being who is so-called true is he who is not necessarily true to himself, but instead as he ought to be, according to a foreign power like Spain before the Spanish-American War of 1898, or according to a domestic power with foreign influence like U.S.-backed Batista, who ruled with U.S. intervention after the war. Therefore, Lam's characters might reason today that they wear masks because they do not wish to look as they ought to. They might not desire to assimilate and become human beings who are true to being white, but not true to being non-white or Cuban, Hispanic. Let's now take a look at Abela's painting, Mujer, or Woman. The Cuban woman sits confidently in front of trees as upon a throne, suggesting a desire to protect the Cuban economy from a foreign power or a domestic power with foreign influence. Upon her throne, she observes the Cuban world around her, to which she reasonably wants to assimilate. The Cuban world around her is primarily produce, which is reasonably important for economic strength in the Cuban marketplace, similar to the sugarcane behind both Avela's Cuban woman and Lam's Cuban characters. The economic products in the Cuban woman's world are not only those which she protects and observes in the Cuban world, they are also those from which she desires to gain identity as a Cuban in the Cuban world. That is similar to Martinican writer Suzanne Césaire, the Cuban woman does not necessarily desire to assimilate to the white world's technologies prohibited by the embargo. These technologies are the same technologies that, as history says, have been seized with a veritable madness, the result of which have been the creative colonial and neocolonial desire to control the global economy, which is the same veritable madness for power and domination, which turned humanity upside down during catastrophes as horrible as the two world wars. Instead, the Cuban woman prefers to live comfortably upon her throne and not upside down in entropic chaos afforded by a global economy dominated by white, largely US technologies that have the potential to colonize, neo-colonize, and create entropically chaotic war. That is, if Abela had painted his Mujer today, the Cuban woman might suggest the average Cuban's ability to remain comfortable enough in a Cuban economy without additional affordance for entropic chaos possible from the technology transfer that the embargo currently prohibits. In other words, despite or because of the embargo's inequitable decrease in limited resource availability for economic growth and opportunity possible on the island, the embargo might perhaps unintendedly encourage the Cuban woman to assimilate to a highly nationalized mixed command economy within a Cuba that is forced to largely rely upon its own endogenous production and consumption of the economic products, such as those in Abela's Mujer. Third, let's now take a look at Cárdenas' sculpture, Le Repos du Petit Oiseau, or The Rest of the Little Bird. Made out of pink marble, it appears to seek liberation from itself with juxtaposition between its top and bottom halves like a joint dislocated, but not quite yet amputated. As such, Cardenas' sculpture is an image that dramatizes an inner tension. In the Cuban context, this inner tension might be a social stress placed on the Cuban people who exist within a revolutionary struggle or lucha between the U.S. and Cuban governments, where the former federal government desires neo-colonial rule over the latter federal government that instead desires détente. As such, a political juxtaposition, I apologize for any noise, it's an urban area. As such, a political juxtaposition exists between the two federal governments' respective desires that might be considered in Cardenas' sculpture. Still, aside from the inner tension and social stress of a U.S.-Cuban political juxtaposition, the fact that the marble is pink might remind the viewer of former president of the Regional Council of Martinique, Aimé Césaire's book, Cahiers de un retour al país natal, or Journal of a Homecoming. In his book, Césaire claims that his tude, or unique attitude or non-white identity, is, quote, neither a neo-colonial and neoliberal U.S. tower nor a Spanish colonial cathedral. It delves into the red flesh of the soil that predates those exogenous influences, unquote. Out of the red flesh of the soil, however, may come pink marble unearthed like a Rome, condensed in father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud's book, civilization and its discontents. As such, Cardenas's Le Repos de Petit Oiseau, which was sculpted during the embargo, might today be reasonably interpreted as a desire to regain this tude, true to the non-white Cuban self, from a time before Spanish colonialism and therefore also before the US's neo-colonial behavior. And next, we'll use the same surrealist works to reason what the artist might say of not only the embargo, but especially its negative impact on Cuban education and economy today. However, let's first go over in very brief the embargo's negative impact on Cuban education and in turn economy today. Without my digressing too deeply into my quantitative and qualitative analyses of Cuban education, important to note here is that Cuban education significantly improved after Castro defeated Batista by multiple measures. However, if Cuba could experience more equitable economic growth and opportunity possible within the global marketplace because of liberation or détente gained without the embargo's neo-colonial behavior, then education in Cuba might be reasonably even more successful because Cuban schools would be able to perform like other schools elsewhere in similar areas that benefit from their nation's respective participations in the global marketplace, rife with Zoom, ChatGPT, and other U.S. technologies available to be leveraged for educational and in turn economic purposes beginning at the local level. First, let's consider again Lam's La Jungla. Perhaps most observable in Lam's painting is the attention paid to the domestically produced and consumed sugarcane, without which the Cuban economy would surely become burdened even more by the global marketplace's dynamism in today's new media age. However, with attention paid to the natural, attention is not paid elsewhere, namely to the industrial or technological. For example, the only technology given significant prominence is the pair of scissors held by one of Lam's masked characters. In Lam's painting, there are no observable U.S. technologies that lead and determine what are possible for economic growth and opportunity within the global marketplace of free trade and technology transfer, such as ChatGPT, where Lam's La Jungla painted today. Where Lamb's La Jungla painted today, the absence of the technological might suggest an awareness of the negative impact or negative economic development encouraged by Cuba's inability to receive much of the technologies transferable in the global marketplace, i.e., the same technologies that are mostly associated with the US and that could otherwise be utilized for Cuban economic growth and opportunity at the country level, beginning with Cuban education with and about the utilizable technology in the Cuban classroom. Second, let's consider again Abela's Mujer. In Lamb's La Jungla, as Lamb's La Jungla does not pay much attention to the technological, so does Abela's Mujer. In fact, Abela's Mujer pays even less attention to the technological. While Lamb's La Jungla includes a pair of scissors, the technology included in Abela's Mujer is less advanced, which is shocking because a pair of scissors is already not very advanced technology. The less advanced technology included in Abela's Mujer is a wooden wheel, perhaps made from the forest of Cuban sugarcane in Lamb's La Jungla. This realization that Abela's Cuban woman is surrounded by less advanced technology than Lamb's characters agrees with what we discussed before, that the Cuban woman is comfortable enough without technologies transferable, that is, without the risk of entropic chaos possible from the technologies transferable without embargoed reason, even if she would prefer not to have the embargo because it is neo-colonial behavior after all. But what's more, were it painted today, Abela's Mujer might also suggest that, as exampled by the Cuban woman, the average Cuban is content enough with the fact that Castro created considerable success for education in Cuba, despite or because of the embargo's negative economic development. Still, this notion does not necessarily mean that the average Cuban, similar to Avela's Cuban woman, would prefer to keep the embargo in place. As we previously discussed, the Cuban government desires détente. Détente would permit technology transfer across all major sectors and industries, with Cuban schools better able to teach students how to utilize technologies for economic growth and opportunity that might benefit the Cuban and global economies at large and especially over the long run. Last, let's consider again Cardenas's Le Repos du Petit Oiseau, where Cardenas's sculpture expresses the inner tension and social stress of the US-Cuban political juxtaposition that we previously explored. This juxtaposition might also be considered a desire to break away from not only the embargo, but especially the embargo's negative impact on education because of the inability for technology transfer and in turn the economic growth and opportunity possible for Cuba. That is, the juxtaposition might be further considered with respect to Cuban education and economy specifically, such that in breaking away from the U.S. government's neocolonial behavior, the Cuban marketplace, which includes Cuban schools, might gain access to technology currently transferred more equitably between other sovereign nations elsewhere and in similar areas without embargoed reason within the global marketplace. In kind, this notion promotes the previously unearthed Cuban identity, condensed without the U.S. government's neocolonial towers, built as the embargo's different policies that make up the U.S. foreign policy collective. Thank you for attending my presentation. Feel free to email me any thoughts, questions, or epiphanies you might have, and feel free to scan the QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect. And then these are my references. There are a fair number. And thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Wonderful. It's been a great panel.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. Lots of wonderful art, lots of amazing ideas, and some great tips also. I mean, you really had me thinking, Nathaniel, about the rituals of writing. I'm a walker, so I enjoy walking a lot between, writing sessions. And yeah, I was wondering, I'm going to shoot the first question at you, if you don't mind. So how has it helped you? I mean, any new ideas that were generated? Is there any new boost of energy? So what is your relationship like, if you were to summarize it with moving or with connecting physicality with writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this whole project, right, has been a very long, ongoing kind of thing. And it really did start with the first book I wrote, Drinking in Public, Rules to the Game, which was in Montreal during COVID. There was curfew, so you weren't allowed outside past midnight. There was basically laws where you weren't allowed to go to someone else's house. So isolation became this really big factor. And what I would do is take walks on the canal. And then I started, summer turned to fall, fall turned to winter. And I went, oh my God, it's minus 30 Celsius in Montreal in winter. This is miserable. I need a beer to keep me company. So that's kind of how I got started in this process of exploring how the body relates to what you're writing, because I kind of wrote that book subconsciously, just doing it. And I went, oh, I should write about this, blah, blah, blah. And I went, oh my God, ding, 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 lights are going off. But I think too, really the benefit of, as I call it, physicality, but mostly I walk. I did run and I did swim for the month that I did these other authors' routines. None of them are as good as walking. Walking is the best, hands down. But I think something that really became obviously beneficial is that it makes you think in a different way. So issues or things, subconsciously things will pop in your mind where you go, oh, I should write about that were never even in the conscious mind to begin with.
You reminded me of a session we had a few years ago, before the LABOC was born, when we were just Indelible, our literary journal, which is still there, of course. But we invited a writer and motivational psychologist who works with writers, and his name is Stephen Kellner. I'm not sure if you've heard of Stephen Kellner. And he was talking about the power of walking and taking showers. And that is because, and it's so funny he said that, because he said that most of the ideas that you get, and the challenges in capturing them, is you get it with the 3 B's. Bed, bath, and bus. And then the bath is particularly powerful. So a good tip there would be to keep a marker in the shower so that you could write the stuff on the wall. And it's funny that he mentioned that, because when I was writing my thesis, that's what I did as well. So, I had to capture those ideas somewhere. And for some reason, yes, I mean, is it probably the power of standing up and sort of like letting go of just sitting there trying to get ideas out. So maybe it's the freeing of the body that frees the mind somehow. And well, it's really interesting. I mean, I've always been interested in this connection between writing and moving, and what are some of the movements that actually help. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. And actually, I realize I am a little familiar with Kellner because as soon as he went the three
Oh,
Bs, I went, yes, Bed, Bath, and
uh-huh.
Bust. And it's interesting too, because I think as much as movement is involved, there is also this kind of, when we're talking about walking and the study in the Victorian era and people like Thoreau and Rousseau come up, even
Mm-hmm.
Descartes to a certain extent, a lot of them talk about a return to the primal man. As
Yeah.
as inspiration, does it come from the walking itself, or does it come from isolation
Mm-mm.
or a separation from society? And sleeping, bathing, and movement are like the oldest things humans have done forever, right? So there's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting link there too to, does this allow us to access a part of our brain that modern society is kind of training us to turn off? And I think
Right.
I see
Yeah.
Danuta has a question.
Danuta. Oh, you're muted, Danuta. Sorry, we can't hear you. Yeah.
Is it unmuted? Oh, unmuted? Okay.
Yep.
I can really relate to that because with the increase in electronic technology, the artificial intelligence, I thought to myself, oh my God, people will be sitting even more than they've been before. So I researched a little bit. As a former physician, I was interested what happens to the brain. And I came across studies that show that indeed walking does a lot for your brain because it brings nourishment to your brain through the blood, and not fast exercise and not crosswords, none of this. So that's one thing, and I found out that some of the high level people in the AI, they often walk during their conferences, not sit.
Oh,
So this is important. But however, I want to say something a little bit opposite to that, namely that this is what I do. Breton says, supply yourself with writing materials after having settled yourself in a favorable place. When I sit down or lie down with my cat on my legs, that's when my most creative things happen. However, if I sit too long at the computer or sit down, I really enjoy like half an hour or more. I get up and walk and feel
yeah.
revitalized. So thank you very much, Nathaniel, for your help.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a personal choice, or everyone is different. So some people work good sitting, some people work good walking. But I think if we were to create the perfect writer in a lab, I'd imagine they do a bit of both to sort of stimulate different modes of thinking and different ways of solving a problem, different ways of being creative, because your brain just works differently and depending on the
Yeah.
situation, right?
But
Mm-hmm.
If I can jump
That's
in and add
wonderful.
something. Yeah, I
Yes,
was thinking
Osvaldo.
also while Nathaniel was presenting, I am not sure how accurate this attribution is, but Einstein supposedly praised menial activities at some point because he found a connection between doing something very menial and allowing the mind to be free up to try to solve complex problems. No, and actually throughout history we can find many connections between bodily activity, not many, but several, I say, bodily activity, creativity, and spaces. I was thinking the peripatetic school, philosophy, ancient
Mm-hmm.
Greek peripatetic, should be done while walking. And it's a
Yeah.
mixing of shifting what the gaze captures every time, as you're walking through the Acropolis, and thinking and engaging the body in activity and getting all those creative fluids or thinking fluids flowing. No, the flaneur literature in
Mhm.
contemporary to Victorian literature. No, the idea of going for a walk, capturing these scenes, and then as soon as you get back home, writing them down so
Yep.
that you have both the energy of the walk and also all that you can capture from the growing city, no, in late 19th century France or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure, but I think peripatetic philosophy was named after the path to the temple, which was the Parapus or something. I can't remember.
Mhm.
The very
But
part
it's
I think
interesting.
it implies the idea of walking. I believe my ancient Greek is not
Yeah,
there,
it
but
does. And it's really interesting too, because even when you're mentioning the Victorian era writers, there were writers who would walk and stop and write on their walk, and then walk and then stop and write. And there were writers who would walk, come back home, and then write everything, right? So again, it comes down to this question of, what works best for the individual. And that's kind of the tricky part about my paper, where I'm going, oh, push-ups are bad, they don't work. Running is okay, but you have to get used to running. Walking is great. What works for me may not work for, anyone else, but there is, this kind of history behind walking specifically that's really ingrained there. And I wanted to kind of try to expand that to other forms of physicality and see, do they work also? And kind of.
Thank you so much, Osvaldo. And I see Cassie's hand up, her virtual hand.
Thank you. Just following on from that conversation, it seems to me that walking, it's not just the thought that's provoked during the walk, but the accumulative effect of walking and keeping it as a daily ritual that might emerge months later. Or, what's interesting is that you're talking about them, like Dickens say, he gets up and he writes, then he walks, then he sleeps, and then he writes. And the same with, I think, the other writers you talked about. So it seems to me that the walking, something's generated during the walk, and then the sleep almost consolidates what has happened during the physicality. So it's a combination of what Danuta was saying, putting your feet up and resting, but also the physicality. I don't know if that's something you think.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started this, like I call it method writing, where I take an author and I do their method, and then what happened? Oh my God. The first time I started it, I did Murakami, but only for a week. So I did him for 7 days, and I'm not a runner. And so I ran 10 kilometers a day for 7 days, and it was miserable. And my writing was horrible because I'd wake up at 4 in the morning and I was sleepy and my legs hurt. And there wasn't a long enough temporal time. There wasn't a long enough time frame to get into the ritual, get into the habit, get into the routine. A routine's not a routine if you do it for 7 days, right?
Right.
And so I think absolutely you're right that there is this slow buildup, this daily accumulation of these maybe ideas, or the way, if you do something long enough, your brain will tweak a little bit. But I think there absolutely is a correlation between doing it for X amount of time, right? I've done it for 28 days. I would say around the 2-week mark was usually when I would kind of notice, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of writing a little differently now. Oh, these like weird ideas are kind of popping out, even when I'm not on a walk, even when I come home and I wake up in the morning and go, oh yeah, no, that's a good idea. So I think absolutely there's a correlation between the, not the duration of time you do it, but the duration of days you do it. Let's say it doesn't matter if you do it 4 hours a day or 20 hours a day, but you have to do it for 10 days or whatever the magic number is. But absolutely.
Thank you.
Is it also the intensity, Nathaniel? So, for example, your body is a bit more lax when it's walking than the strenuous exercises such as push-ups and sit-ups and running. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as I mentioned, I think there needs to be a middle ground where the mind and the body can sync up. And doing something too strenuous, the only problem the mind is trying to solve is, how can I make my body feel good? If like ow, this hurts, this is painful, I don't want to do this. If those are the thoughts that are coming in subconsciously, there's not going to be room for the creative problem solver's mind to kind of emerge and allow you to think differently.
What about
Mhm.
settling into the discomfort? I'm just thinking something like yoga, where you might be in a pose that is strenuous or uncomfortable, like your sit-ups might be, but because maybe you hold the pose for some time, and you can kind of almost transcend the discomfort, if that makes sense. Whereas with something like sit-ups, where you're kind of sweaty and it's intense, and I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean,
That might have an effect.
that's what happened with the running, right? For the first 2 weeks, it was miserable, and then your body adjusts to the running and you get used to the running. The issue with the push-ups and the sit-ups was that unless I were to do, 100 sit-ups and then 100 push-ups in one go, I'm just not doing it long enough to like for the mind and the body to like link up, if that makes sense. Where running is, the mind and body wouldn't link up because it's physically straining and my body felt uncomfortable at first, but then after 2 weeks, my body did feel comfortable running 10 kilometers and the link did kind of start to happen. Whereas with push-ups and sit-ups, I think, just as like an example, right? I think they're too short, they don't happen for long enough time, like you can't do push-ups for an hour. Like there's probably some guy who can, but I definitely can't. So I think there's this combination of the activity not being too strenuous, and it has to at least last probably half an hour or something. Because even running, once running got comfortable, the first 10 minutes I was empty, and then by minute 20, these little thoughts are popping in. By minute 40, you're going, oh my god, that character really needs to die. Oh great, okay, cool, now I have to rewrite my book. But these thoughts, they come in slowly, and I think there is a real temporal aspect to the physicality that there's not a limit, the lower limit, a minute, like there's a minimum, there it is, there's a minimum amount of time that the physicality needs to take place, I argue, in order for the harmony to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I was thinking then when I was saying about yoga, like say yin yoga, you might hold a pose for 3 to 5 minutes. So if you were to do the sit-ups, you're constantly moving. Whereas if you were to hold a sit-up position, I don't know, there's a point where it's the mind kind of wants to move away from the discomfort of the body, and they transcend it, if that makes sense in a way.
Yeah, like
to a creative place.
You push your mind into a new place through the uncomfortability of holding X position.
You should almost go through the discomfort to emerge from it, if that makes sense. It's fascinating.
A bit of escapism.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'll have to try that. I'll try planking next time.
Yeah, let us know.
I can see that working very well also in a creative, in a workshop on creative writing, having exercises like that and a student's diary and their progress. That can even give further data on that relationship between exercise and creativity that you're exploring, but from some other people's perspective.
Absolutely. It could be interesting to try to document the changes, if any, that happen. It's like, okay, for a month, walk every day for an hour. Do you become a better writer? If you write every day for an hour, you will.
If I may interject, I'm curious too if perhaps so I used to be a runner, and I was fortunate to have some success, and something that I learned from other people and some very good coaches is to try to get over that hurdle, so to speak, no pun intended, of experiencing that sort of pain or a unique kind of trauma before getting into the groove of things and having the thoughts come easier to you. In runner's term, maybe to achieve that runner's high a bit earlier on in the process, would be to go out running not for distance but for time, and then graduate into running for distance. And so that way you don't experience the same sort of pain, and it's easier on you psychologically as well, and your brain is able to enter into more of that subconscious space. That's something I've experienced as a runner, and I know others have too. But that's just my little 2 cents there about one way maybe to get over that hurdle.
Yeah, and I mean, it was something that would happen was essentially I'd go to a track and run laps, right? For the first 3 laps, you're only focused on counting the second lap because you're not focused, right? You're not focused on how long you run, you're focused on the distance. So you're run the first lap and you go, okay, but now I'm on the second lap. You run the second lap, okay, I'm on the third lap. You run the third lap and you go, what would Gary say in this situation? You run the fourth lap, you go, maybe my novel should be set in the medieval times instead of the present, right? But absolutely that initial hurdle to get over could very easily be made more difficult depending on how you're mentally framing it to yourself, right? Absolutely. And that absolutely happened to me. I wish I just ran for an hour consistently instead of trying to hit that 10-kilometer mark every time, because for the first week it was not fun.
My hat's off to you. That's a good distance. 10K.
Danuta.
Yes, I don't know how much longer this conference is going to take place, but my impression of the surrealist movement is that it gave us something universal to think about, change ideas, approach to life, and so on. So I would like to say how much I really appreciated Jesse and Osvaldo's presentation, that they addressed the universal. Although I enjoyed the whole conference, I think we had, really beautiful presentations and so on. But maybe it's just my quirkiness, but I really always am interested in the universal issue. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it that you let me be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danuta, and thank you for your wonderful participation in this conference and for sharing your great work with us. And before we close, I just wanted to see if anyone else has something to say. We still have 3 more minutes before the end of the conference. So is there any other question that someone would like to pop in?
I don't have a question, but I would like to thank Danuta for your kind words. It's very sweet of you. Thank you. And I agree, Osvaldo's presentation. I saw a unique connection between the two of ours that I appreciated. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Zane.
Thank you all so much. As we come to an end of this lovely 2-day conference, I want to express my gratitude for all the rich discussions and the innovative ideas that we've shared over the past 2 days. We've been all over. So we've explored surrealism's impact across various disciplines. So we had music, we had painting, we had writing, you name it, we had it here. And our speakers have actually been amazing. Each and every one of you, you've all illuminated how surrealist approaches continue to challenge conventional thinking and inspire new forms of creative expression. We looked at so many things, and I'm particularly happy that we looked at the enduring influence of surrealism on contemporary art and thought. And lots of new and exciting projects arose as well. So many, as I said earlier, so many surrealists that we hadn't heard of were brought to the table, and we got to meet their work. And many of you here as well, like Carly, for example, is a surrealist collage artist. So that's also wonderful to get a chance to see everybody else's art-based research and practical art being here shared with us. We also looked at the role of the unconscious in many of our sessions, the unconscious and the creative process. Surrealism's power to address many social issues as well. The intersection of surrealism with gender and identity, and some new methodologies in arts-based research also that are inspired by surrealist techniques. So thank you so much for demonstrating how surrealism is not just a historical movement, but also a vibrant, evolving approach to understanding and reimagining our world. So let's keep the conversation going, and feel free to keep contact with one another we hope to see you at many of our forthcoming events as well. So we have 2 free events coming up every month. The ones in October are on October 7 and October, I forgot when the next one is, sorry. But stay tuned and have a look at both our Site Creative and our Indelible Evenings event. The other one is on the 20-something. You know, if you're on the subscribers list, then you'll be getting our regular updates and information on forthcoming events. So we do have a conference, and some of you are in it already. October 12th and 13th, we have Patricia Levy. So the iconic Patricia Levy, an art space researcher and novelist, and you know, you've all heard of her one way or the other. So she will be here with us in London on the 16th of October, and also she's our keynote speaker for our Science and Sensibility Conference on the 12th and 13th of October. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, Sarah has it up now in the chat box, so feel free to check out everything else that is coming soon. So thank you again. Let's stay in touch. We'd love to see you at our events in the future. And we'd love to hear about your work and see how it has evolved and the new things that you are up to. So have a wonderful evening or day, depending on where you're joining us from, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Rula.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you all.
much. Take care all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.